right.
Hello.
I'm coming.
Hello.
Well, we're starting. Okay, so it's 6:30, actually 6:32, and we're going to kick off. So good evening, good afternoon, good morning to whoever is attending this evening's, for us, first edition of our show and tell put up by the Malta Map Society. We're very excited about this event. As you all know, we have 5 different speakers this evening from different walks of academic life and different interests, and we're very, very much looking forward to listening to everybody's presentations. I would like to thank Crystal Attard-Trevisan, who is our secretary on the committee of the Malta Map Society, who has been looking after all sorts of technical issues. So any problems, please don't ask me, because I will just mess it up for you probably. Each presentation is 10 minutes long. I'm going to be very strict with the 10 minutes. Any questions or any comments that you have, we are going to leave them for the end, and they could be conveyed through the chat room, correct, Crystal? Okay. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker, and that is our friend, Dr. Daniel Gullo, who is the Joseph S. Micallef Director of the Malta Study Centre at the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, probably better known as HMML. As director of the centre, Dr. Gullo works very, very hard to digitally preserve the early modern and medieval heritage of Malta, as well as that of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, and creates online access to these digital collections in vhmml.org. He'll be talking about printed maps at the HMML's Malta Study Centre, which contains a small collection of important maps, both separated from their original publications, but also bound in their original printed works. And this short discussion will focus on a small selection of the more significant maps found in this particular collection. Though common to most major collectors, these maps represent an important addition to the growing knowledge of repositories holding rare exemplars around the world. So over to you, Daniel, and your 10 minutes start now.
Thank you very much, Bernardine, and it's a great pleasure to be here again. This is the second time I've had to speak to my colleagues in Malta in less than a week, so this is quite exciting for me, especially since it's been nearly 2 years since I've had the opportunity to be in the island. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to connect with all of you. I'm going to talk about 3 maps today. Well, a little more than 3 maps, but 3 maps in particular. And since these are quite famous in their history, and many of you know about them, I won't go into a great deal of historical information about these maps, but what I will do is try to talk about them in light of what they are as objects by themselves. I would like to note here, I'm also not a professional map historian nor a cartographer by training, and so I am limiting my comments to those basic things that I can say as the curator of the collection. As a small note to the maps within the Malta Study Center, we have about 15 separated maps within the collection, a few that were printed as broadsides or as singletons. The rest have been separated from printed books. I have not yet done a full inventory of all of the maps that are found in printed volumes. but we do have standard representations found in the general histories of the order, particularly the Baldwin and Bozio series of publications, and also the Bella 17th century publication, and et cetera, et cetera. But I will point out today that we do have a few singular things I think are worthy to note within our collection. The most important of which, of course, you can see here, which of course is the Jean Quintin publication from 1536. This lovely woodcut printed map of the island of Malta that was produced by Jean Quintin as part of a general information campaign about the island after the order had seized or gained control over it through Charles V in 1530. I know many of you know a lot about this map and its publication history, so I won't go into the details of it. There are a few things though that I would like to point out about this particular exemplar. One of which is probably the most important, that it is partially an imperfect copy. I say this because if you look very closely at the map, though it is in very good condition, it has been trimmed. You can see from the standpoint of the framing of the woodcut border, it has lost text and I should say decoration, both on the foredge and the what would be the lower spine edge of the image. I think that in itself is worthy to point out, but also what I think is truly remarkable about this particular map is the volume itself within which it is bound. And in reality, this doesn't exist as a singular printed work in a cover, but it is part of a collection of materials related to Malta and the Mediterranean. It is the second item in the volume, and I've listed the other items here in order. And you can see that the collector who put these together in the 19th century was extremely interested in Melitensia, but also things that would have been related to the history of the order and the history of the Mediterranean in the 16th century. So it forms part of a nice collection of materials. Of those materials which are in this volume, one of them, of course, has a map, and this is the Guerra del Turco, which has this woodcut map of Methone or Modon, which is the poetic history of the conflict between Venice and the Ottomans in 1500. So these are two maps that are bound together in this single volume. So I was told to leave some room for questions about things, so I'll move on to the next object after this. The second object I actually like very much. This is the Maltus Vetus et Nova in the short title. It was printed in 1660 in Helmstadt by Henning Müller. And it is a very interesting work because it is the product of a grand tour by Christoph Garhald Freiherr von Blumenthal in 1656 to Malta, where his father had sent him. Christoph Kasper was a career diplomat and also an ambassador to France. And he came to Malta with his tutor at the time, who was Burkhard Niederstedt. And Burkhard Niederstedt took to the object of writing this Maltus Vetus et Nova, but based upon his journey with Caspar von Blumenthal. We do know the engraver of the map, whose name is Abraham Albry, and it was published by Friedrich Ulrich Kalixt. So let's take a look at a few things of the main engraving and then a few brief comments about the map below. The main engraving, of course, at the top has the coat of arms of the order and also Lascaris, Grandmaster Lascaris, which is interesting because this would have been the Grandmaster at the time of the visit, but had passed away since the time of the publication. There is a figure of St. John the Baptist, and then we have the coat of arms of the cities of Victoriosa, Valletta, Mdina, and Senglea. I have yet to identify the other coat of arms in the right column. Obviously, I thought it might have been one of the commanderies in the Long of Germany, but I haven't been able to figure it out yet. And it is not the coat of arms of the patron to which this was dedicated. And so it's there. But what we do have at the bottom is something which I think is quite important, which of course is the inset map or the cartouche map of the fleet of the galley of the order. The galleys of the order, all arranged in front of the islands. I think this is really a quite nice map. We have the illustrations of Komino as an island, but Kominoto is listed, but I don't actually see it on the map itself. So, you know, it's not illustrated as part of it, though it's acknowledged. And interestingly, it's given a much larger name than Komino, which one would expect the size to be reversed. And also we see the building of Valletta and as the city. Mdina, however, does not figure prominently in this particular map. It's obviously identifiable to us, just like Victoria is in Gozo, but it's not labeled. And none of the towns are labeled. The emphasis here on this particular map, of course, is on the fleet and the islands themselves, rather than any identification of cities, towns, or fortifications. The final map is actually from the Militaris Ordis Johannitarum Rhodiorum, printed in Basel by Thomas Guarin. This was the history of the order by Heinrich Pantaleone, which was subsequently condemned by the Inquisition. What is interesting about this map is that it's a very, very small map within the publication in comparison to the larger maps that highlight the history of the order. These maps tend to be half-page headings that are placed in front of each chapter. And for those who are, of course, familiar with the history of maps of Malta, they will note that this actually is the woodcut that comes from Sebastian Muster's cosmography, which was repurposed for the Pantaleone publication. This map is also in my collection here in the German edition, printed in 1578 with a hand-colored woodcut map. One of the questions I would like to pose to the group as we end this is to ask them whether or not this map is actually, like the Pantaleone map, a reinvention or a reinterpretation of the original map by Jean Coutin, obviously turned to the right, and then, you know, obviously expanded on. And with that, I will end my comments for discussion.
Daniel, that was a very interesting talk, and you took exactly 10 minutes. The rest of the speakers, please follow his example. Okay, so let us move on to the second speaker, and that's Emmanuel. Hello, Emmanuel. Good evening. Nice to see you again. He's a retired chartered certified accountant and certified public accountant. He retired from employment in the capacity of auditor and tax consultant in 2004. And following his retirement, he started compiling a collection of replica maps of Malta, which today totals almost 1,300 replica maps from the 16th to the 19th centuries, accompanied with very, very thorough cartobibliographical details. I look forward to my retirement. He is an independent researcher with a keen interest in travel narratives concerning Malta, published prior to the 20th century, and he has written articles for Treasures of Malta, the Malta Map Society Journal, and Merita Historica. So his presentation will be about a map of Malta by Nicolas Sanson. Sanson and his descendants were the most influential French cartographers of the 17th century. Sanson had started his career as a historian and resorted to cartography as a means of illustrating his historical studies. Sanson prepared a series of maps which came to the attention of King Louis XIII, who, impressed by the quality of his work, appointed him Géographe ordinaire du roi. Sanson published an enormous quantity of maps, which initiated the golden age of French map making, earning him the title of the father of French cartography. Sanson's map of Malta was published in 1656, and his map featured in at least 11 publications without noticeable variations, except for the title shown in the cartouche. And now I give the floor to Manuel, and you may start.
Hello, thank you, Bernardine. In this brief bibliographical survey, I shall be talking about several publications in which the map of Malta by Nicholas Sanson had featured and which so far I have been able to identify. Of course, an introduction on who was Sanson was given by Bernardine, and I do not need to repeat what she had brilliantly said about this famous cartographer. Now, so far, I have identified 11 publications in which the map of Malta by Sanson had featured. The map appeared first in 1656. The map has detailed place names. The orientation of the map is towards north, with coordinates placed around the border of the map. The map shows a beacon on Filfla. In the map of Gozo, he placed the town of Gozo on the southwest coast instead of Rabat, naming it Goza Kast. The size of the map tends to vary according to the format of the publication in which it featured. The map was copied several times by various writers and publishers, including Johann David Sunner, Johannes Rebus and Simon Devray, François Halma, and André de Suzette. And this is the list of the publications which I have come across which contain the map of Sanson. Now, this is the first state of Sanson's map, which appeared in 1656. The cartouche speaks of Nicholas Sanson as the geographer to the King of France, with reference to a printing privilege of 20 years. As I said, the map is dated 1656, and it was engraved by Abraham Pironi. These are the publications in which the first state of Sanson's map featured. It featured in a geographical description of the core continents of the world in separate volumes, titled Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, which was published over a period of 1648 to 1657. The map of Malta was included in the third volume, L'Afrique, dedicated to Nicolas Fouquet, with 18 double-page maps, each followed by several pages of text describing the area shown on the map. The first edition, as I said, the 1656, I have come to such editions. There is another edition of 1665. One of the editions is strangely with a double F, L'Afrique. I am also aware that there are other editions, in particular the one at BNF, which is dated 1705, but unfortunately it does not have the title page. Now we come to another variant of Sanson's map. The cartouche again speaks of Nicholas Sanson as geographer to the king, but there is no reference to the printing privilege of 20 years, which apparently had expired. The map in this case is engraved by Antoine de Winter, and also there is no date in the map. This map appeared in L'Europe which was obviously published in Paris in 1683, and it was also dedicated to Monsieur Michel de Tellier, the Secretary of State, Marquis of Barbezot. This map also featured in Introductio ad Geographicam Novum et Veteram, published in Utrecht by Honest Lutz in 1692. Again, it also featured when in 1683, Simon de Vrij brought out a Dutch edition of Europa, Asia, Africa, and America, which was published in Utrecht by Johannes Rebius with 62 hand-colored maps after Sanson, and which also included a version of this map, as I said. The same map also featured in 1700, when Francis Halmois brought out his Description de tout l'univers at Amsterdam in 1700, as I've said. Now we come to a very interesting variant of Sanson's map. The map is accompanied with the map of Cape Verde. It is printed on page 20 in the second volume of a 3-volume publication in French and Latin. The map is placed on the upper part of the page that includes beneath it the map of Cape Verde Islands. The cartouche refers to Sanson as geographer to the King of France, enjoying printing privilege of 20 years. However, it is to be noted that the date of the map was altered to read 700. Now, this famous publication was published in 1697, but strangely enough, the latest map which it contains is dated 1709. And this is the title page of the book. Now we come to another variant of Sanson's map. This is a re-engraved version of the map, with the title now in the cartouche in Latin. Mer Mediterranean now becomes Mare Mediterraneum. Mer de Sicile becomes Mare Siculum. This map appeared in 1679 when Johann Zoomers published in Frankfurt am Main a German translation of Nicholas Sanson's Atlas, again Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, which appeared again in 1665. And obviously it was Zoomer published his work in 4 parts in 1 volume with an additional engraved title with female allegorical figures representing the 4 continents. Now we come to another version of Sanson's map. This time it is in Dutch. And the map obviously is the one engraved by Antoine de Winter. The map featured in the 3rd volume of a Dutch general description of the world written by Perotti de la Croix and published in 1705 in Amsterdam by François Halma. The book is a revised and enlarged translation of the work written by Sanson de Vrij about a novel method of understanding world geography. And here are the title pages of the book. It's a very beautiful title page. Now we come to the last version of Sanson's map which I've come about, and this is a replica of the one engraved by Antoine de Winter, but the map is numbered 258 at the top right corner. The map is found in a very rare 2nd volume atlas minor, published in Amsterdam in 1734 by Henri de Suzette. The atlas comprised 285 maps numbered at the right top corner of each map. Now I thank you for watching and listening, and at the same time, I would like to thank Dr. De Celis for assisting me with the Zoom presentation.
Proceed.
Wonderful presentation. It's no wonder that King Louis XIII was so impressed with Sanson's work. And I must say the displays of the frontispieces are really impressive. Thank you very, very much, Manuel. And kudos to you for also keeping to the 10 minutes slot. Thank you. It makes chairing easier. Right. We'll move on to the third speaker of this evening, and that's Dr. Ivan Sadny, who's a lawyer specialized in public international law and a former career diplomat. Dr. Ivan Sadny is a founder member of the Malta Map Society and has served as its vice president since the society was established in 2009. He'll be dedicating his presentation to a set of 5 19th century folded printed maps of Malta in a contemporary slipcase. From the military-related manuscript markings on the maps and the owner's signature on the outside cover of 3 of the 5 maps, one presumes that these maps were the personal working maps of Colonel Edmund Gilling Hallowell, I hope the pronunciation is correct, who served in Malta from October 1849 to March 1854, and from November 1856 to April 1864, when he left Malta to take up the post of Commandant of the Royal Military College in Sandhurst. Ivan, we're all ears. Over to you.
I'll just make sure I'm sharing the screen. Can you see the screen, Bernard?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your introduction. And when people think of maps of Malta, especially people who approach the collecting of maps or the study of maps for the first time, they're attracted to the beautiful Baroque maps of the 18th, 17th century, and then the rarer maps like were introduced in the first talk by Mr. Gullo, the pre-siege maps and the Great Siege maps. And when I started getting interested in maps about 40 years ago, 19th century maps were a bit the Cinderella of map collectors. And I was a bit sad because they're really very interesting maps. What I find very interesting, and this puts what we're going to see today in perspective, is that in these 40 years, I've seen an increase in the interest in 19th century maps. Even the Malta Map Society had organized a very interesting exhibition of the Brockdorf maps, and there's a very good catalogue by Dr. Berganado, Joseph Schiro, and Claude Michalev-Attard, which I recommend to our members. And that was issued in 2012. And the year after, 2013, there was a very interesting...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have a request for you to maximize the slides of your presentation because we're still seeing the...
Can someone tell me how to do that?
You have to switch to slideshow.
I'm in front of the PowerPoint presentation. So what should I click?
If you go to slideshow.
On the bottom bar.
Slideshow? Okay.
Yes. Play from current slide. From current. Okay. That's right.
Okay.
Okay, Chris.
Oops.
And Ivan, yes?
Thanks. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So, well, what I was saying is that then there was this publication of the charting of the Maltese waters by Perit, William Soler, and Dr. Granado. And that put the maps we're going to see today in the perspective of the charting of the Maltese waters. And I would recommend for people who are more interested in the subject to follow there. Coming to the maps themselves, this is what they looked like when we first saw them. you don't know what you're going to find when you see something like that. And immediately you start asking yourself, do you know who these maps belong to? Were they actually working maps? Were the maps modified by the owner for his personal use? And in this particular case, why this unusual combination of maps straddling more than 3 decades in one set? And this is what I hope in 10 minutes to be sharing with you. The first 2 maps were drawn by Captain later Admiral William Henry Smith and engraved by J. Walker and published by the Hydrological Office of the Admiralty on 19 July 1823. So these first 2 maps are the oldest in the set. And they formed part of 4 maps that had been included in a large survey that had been done in 1814, 1815, and 1816 by Captain Smith. Captain Smith is a very important figure in the surveying of the Mediterranean, and there are a lot of publications, and his own autobiography, where Malta features quite prominently as well. The first map of these 2 old maps, let's call them that way, is a plan of the harbors and fortifications of Valletta in the island of Malta. And it's one of the 3 maps where you see on the cover on the left-hand side of the screen, there's an ownership signature of Lieutenant Colonel Hallowell. And on the right-hand side, you can see a description of the title. And the map itself as a whole looks like this. Given the time constraints, we cannot go into all the manuscript markings there are, but this is one of the maps which is most heavily used. Obviously, a lot of the activity of the military was around the Grand Harbour and the fortifications around the Grand Harbour. So I'll just go quickly through some of photos of the markings and also the 3 illustrations that are present on the map itself. This is the Castle of St. Angelo. This is again the castle and the lighthouse of St. Elmo. And this is an appearance of Valletta from a particular point. This is something which used to be included in maritime charts to help a captive on a ship that would be approaching the island, and there would be a particular appearance of how Malta looks when you are approaching from a particular angle. And that would help the captain of the ship to move the ship to its right destination. These are some of the manuscript markings that need to be studied from a military point of view. The distances from the palace, which was like the center of all military activity, markings on the individual fortifications, the type of thing that shows that these were really working maps that, in this case, Lieutenant Colonel Hallowell would bring out, mark, use while going around on his duties as one of the senior officials of the military presence of the British in Malta. The second map, which is a contemporary of the first map, is a plan of St. Paul's Bay. Again, the cover is signed by Lieutenant Colonel Hallowell. This one has no manuscript markings, which one would lead one to assume that there was very limited activity around St. Paul's Bay. Nevertheless, it's a very attractive map. It has 2 illustrations, one of Aura Point with the tower and battery of the university, and also Salmona Palace or Salmon Palace. And as you could see, it's quite a attractive map. Compared to the other maps, which seem to be a bit more technical, this seems to be a more pleasing to the eye and less markings even of in the maritime sector. The third map, here we're skipping 3 decades. We're in a third map surveyed by Captain Thomas Graves and Captain Thomas Pratt in 1854 and published by the Hydrological Office. The cover is not signed, but it belongs to the same sets and they're the same handwriting, so one has no doubt that it belongs to the same set of maps. And it's a map of the island of Malta from Valletta to Marsa Scirocco. Valletta still used to be spelled with 1 L at the time. And again, this is quite an attractive map with 3 appearances. This is the map as a whole. And it does have some manuscript markings, but not as much as the first map of the Grand Harbour and the map of Malta, which will be seen later. These are the appearances. And you can see very fine steel engravings. The detail is quite impressive. The 4th and 5th maps are taken from the plan of the islands of Malta and Gozo surveyed by Lieutenant James Worsley from the Royal Engineers in 1824 and engraved in 1856 at the Ordnance Map Office in Southampton. Again, this one has a bit of a doubt whether they should be referred to as 2 separate maps as they are presented in this collection, when one knows that they actually come from one map. And this we'll see in subsequent slides. For the purpose of this presentation, we are considering them as 2 separate maps, a map of Malta and a map of Gozo. This is the plan of Malta, again signed by Lieutenant Colonel Hallowell on the cover. And this is the map that has seen most use.
Ivan, may I ask you to conclude? We have about 20 seconds left. I'm sorry.
I apologize. Okay, I'll conclude. I'll just go through that very quickly. So this is the whole map of Malta. These are the manuscript markings, a lot of military markings. This is the plan of Gozo. Very few manuscript markings. And what is interesting is that the description of the plan of Malta and plan of Gozo are manuscript titles made by Hallowell compared to other manuscript titles he did in other publications. And this is what I was referring before. This is the whole map of Malta and Gozo. And this is the 2 maps of Malta and Gozo from the collection. You can see a bit cut out and never one to waste. They actually used the Malta from the map to put on the cover of the slipcase. This is Lieutenant Colonel Hallowell, knowing that we would run short of time. The details are all there to be seen later. And I must thank in particular Professor Chris Gregg, who actually wrote a very interesting article in the Sunday Times. And I conclude on this point. It is an article which I recommend people to read because Lieutenant Colonel Hallowell was a very interesting man. And the article can be found in the Sunday Times of the 25th of March, 2018. And from the details given by Professor Gregg, we can date the time when these maps were used by Lieutenant Colonel Hallowell from 1856, when he came back to Malta as a Lieutenant Colonel, to 1860, when he was promoted to Colonel. So it's a very short time, period of time when they were actually, we know, put together. Obviously, he continued using them after his promotion, when he left in 1864 to take up the post of Commandant of the Royal Military College in Sandhurst. I apologize for over speaking
You
over
should be sorry. Thank you very much, Ivan. It's lovely to see maps, let alone when they are working maps, you know, seeing all the scribbles and doodles and the thinking process, especially, you know, of such maps. And I tend to find the folding marks, for some reason, particularly fascinating because, you know, it shows their portability and also their active use. Now I'll shut up because I'm going to go against my sharing criteria. So let's move on to the fourth speaker, and that is Mario Brinkhardt, who is a sociologist with a special interest in economic development and works for the National Development Agency. He's an eclectic collector of militantia and other categories, hoarding anything from press cuttings to photographs, postcards, books, and antique maps. The title of his talk is A Recently Acquired Map of the Battle of Lepanto. Of course, the presentation will focus on the map itself, as well as on its subject as a historical event, the way the subject is treated by the map, and of course, its link to the history of Malta and the order. So we very much look forward to your presentation, Mario. Over to you.
So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. The map, I'll move quickly to the content. The map is this one here. I bought it earlier this year from a reputable dealer in Belgium. This is another view of
Mario, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm afraid we are not seeing anything, although we have started screen sharing.
Mm-hmm.
You need to close it and open it again.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll close the file, open it again.
Sorry, I'm sorry, being guided by, so it's the share screen that you have to close.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
So that means you stop sharing.
Wait a minute. Stop sharing. Okay, stop share. Exactly. So.
Now he has to open his PowerPoint again.
Okay.
It appears on your desktop, right?
It's on.
Okay. And now start sharing.
Okay. So now, wait 1 moment. I have to. And start sharing. Share screen. Share. Is it better now?
Let's see. No, we still don't have anything. Maybe you want to take over. Okay, look, we can, Crystal can do the work for you basically.
Yes, I sent
yes,
a second version
she will be sharing the screen on your behalf because we have a copy of your presentation.
But let me see. Let me try again. Why can't I'm at my end? I'm seeing the message that you are screen sharing. I'm being told.
Yes, we're receiving that too, but for some reason, maybe the Battle of Lepanto has caused a bit of turbulence.
it's got the internet cables underwater, basically. Which version do you have? I sent 2 versions. I said
no, we have the latest. Don't worry, we have the latest one.
Good.
So Crystal will share the screen.
Please.
And just indicate when to change the slides. Is that all right?
Yes.
Very good. You have to stop share, of course, from your end.
Okay, stop sharing. Okay, so let's move to the next slide, please. This is the map. There's you can also move to the next slide, which shows the same map in a different orientation. I show this horizontally.
we're
Yes.
moving along.
Fit height.
Sorry about that. But we'll blame it on the Battle of Lepanto.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
So
Okay.
this is the map, and you can, if you go to the next
the best
slide,
we
you see
can
the
do,
same
so-
map in a different orientation. To have a better view of it. See, now shall we go to the next slide, please? This is the title of the map, which I have transcribed on the next slide. So it is il vero ordine delle due potenti armate cristiana e turca. It tells us that it is published by Gianfrancesco Camoccio in 1571, but the date of this particular copy is actually 1575, around 1575. It is a second state map. It is a copying engraving printed on paper, and the size, not including the margins, is about 24 centimeters by 18 centimeters. So it's basically close to an A4 sheet. So next slide, please. So an interesting point that I would like to make is that the Battle of Lepanto took place on the 7th of October, 1571, under the Julian calendar, which was in force then. But it actually, under the current Gregorian calendar, it took place on the 17th October, which means that last Sunday was the 450th anniversary, making it a very appropriate subject to include in our show and tell. Next slide, please. Something about Camoccio. Camoccio was active in Venice was active in Venice. He was one of the top publishers and engravers in Italy. He is very well known for his Isole Famose volume, which was published between 1571 and 74 in various editions. But he also did a lot of publications in loose sheet form. Interesting one point that would be interesting to note is that the Isole Famose volumes were not, apparently were given the title after he died by his heirs, who continued publishing it. That is his most famous, basically, volume. And next slide, please. And he's also done quite a few things about Malta. This is a map of Malta and Comino with a bit of Gozo. The next map shows Valletta. It's a very early map of Valletta. Valletta was still only the fortifications are visible here. It is very similar to Zenoy's version, to Zenoy's map of Valletta. And Zenoy was actually one of the people working with Camoccio. So it's no surprise that there is a similarity. And he's possibly, there's also obviously his map of the Great Siege, which is the next slide. Which is very rare and about which our friend Joseph Skirop can certainly tell us a lot. These, I believe, have been declared to be a World Heritage by UNESCO, so it's quite an interesting map. A very detailed map, very interesting, but unfortunately we don't have any time to go into it today, but maybe in a future show and tell. Next slide, please. Now, something about the battle itself. Now, the battle took place on the western coast of Greece at the mouth of what is now the Gulf of Patras. This is on the right-hand side. The fleet left from Messina in Sicily, crossed the Ionian and convened close to the Gulf of Patras and eventually moved there. Next slide, please. This is a bigger, closer look. It's basically around the. As I said, the battle took place around the mouth of the Gulf. Lepanto is actually a town to the east called Naspaktos now. It's about 40 nautical miles to the east, basically, of where the battle took place. Next slide, please. This is another map by Camacho showing the location of the battle. You will notice that especially on the north side, the coastline is considerably different to that is shown by Google Maps. There can be two reasons. One of them obviously was that cartography then was not as accurate as it is today, and also because there have been lots of changes to sea level and to the shoreline because of silting. So the islands are actually now part of the mainland. So that's another reason why they have changed. But it gives an idea of where the battle took place. Next slide, please. This, another interesting historical aside, is that the battle was, as the crow flies, took place very close to the location of another very important battle in Western history, which was the Battle of Salamis in 480 BC, which took place around the island of Salamina, in the straits between it and the mainland, that is to the right of the map. So it's not, obviously at the time you had to go around the Peloponnese at the time. Now there's the Corinth Canal, but as the crow flies, it's a very close location. Next slide, please. Now, the final tally of the battle was quite dramatic. And obviously it was a Christian victory. You know, I have put Turkish in inverted commas because we called them Turks, even, you know, when speaking about what is history, but they were actually from all over the Mediterranean, and not just Ottomans, but, you know, people from the Barbary Coast, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Syria. There were 30,000 were killed or wounded, 3,000 were taken prisoner, and on the other side of the equation, 50,000 Christian slaves were freed. The Holy League lost 10 galleys, plus one that was captured, compared to 170 lost by the other side. And the Christian side had 8,000 killed and 21,000 wounded, many of whom died shortly afterwards. Interesting that the only galley captured by the sort of Ottoman Turkish side was actually captured by Ulukali, about whom we'll be hearing quite a bit later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. Now we're back to the map. Let's speak in some more detail about the map now. Can I see the next slide, please? This is not the only map that Camacho did of Lepanto. He also did this map. This is, however, shows the battle a moment in time where the battle has already started and the fleet's already engaging. The map that is our subject today, shows the fleets as they took up their battle positions as they were approaching each other. But as we can see, there are some inaccuracies, but they actually increase, I would say, the interest of the map. Next slide, please. These are, I would be comparing it here, the map here, to some other maps from the same period. And as you will see, Camacho's presentation is quite conventional. You have, you know, the two sides in opposing semicircles with 6 galleasses fronting the Christian navy. Next slide, please. This is from by Balthazar from the National Museum, Maritime Museum in Brussels, in Greenwich, in London. This is by Giorgio Vasari from the Apostolic Palace in Rome. Again, you see the two sides, the reserves at the back, and the 6 galleasses in the middle. Next slide, please. This is by Bertelli from the Museo Storico in Venice. Again, it is a bit of a hybrid. It shows the formations and also the battle. But again, we see the same 6 galleasses facing the other side. And next one, please. And this is from our Maritime Museum, a next photo by Antonello Ricci, which again shows the same kind, in a much more simplified form, the same kind of arrangement. So Camacho's arrangement was quite conventional. Next slide, please. Now, one feature that is immediately visible is that there are less ships drawn on the map than there were actually in the battle, which obviously there wasn't any space probably to include more. If you count
I'm
them
sorry,
all,
Mario, just being the cruel chairperson here, but you have a few seconds left.
I have to hurry.
Thank you.
There were 84 in the map and 83 and 84 against 212, 328, including 120 galleys and fustas. Next one, please. Next slide. This is a detail of the 6 galleasses. In military parlance, this arrangement is called the forlorn hope, and they're put in the vanguard, a very risky position to try to inflict as much damage on the enemy as it's approaching. Next slide, please. This is an enlargement of one of them, and the next slide will show us, this is also from the Museum in Greenwich, what these would have looked like. They were much heavier than the normal galley, also much slower, but much more difficult to board. And in this case, they basically served as artillery platforms because they were much more difficult to maneuver. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, the arrangement shown by Camoccio is not that accurate. The approach, the two sides approached each other their approach was closer to what we see in this map. In fact, the 2 galleasses at the bottom did not manage to take up their positions. They were too slow before the battle started. And if we move to the next slide, we see a slide by a map by Lafreri, who was active in Rome, but roughly contemporary. And we see this is in a way more realistic. You see the 2 galleasses being having a different position to the one shown by Camoccio. This has a very interesting detail which Camoccio misses. Next slide, please. We see the 2 captains, Don John of Austria and Ali Pasha, firing their gunnery to signal their presence to each other, basically challenging each other to have a hand-to-hand fight. No? Next slide, please. Again, this to remind us of what the map looks like. Now, all the major commanders on both sides are listed, and as you can see, in this case, we have also La Capitana di Malta, which was under the command of the Reverend Prior of Messina. And as you will note, all the ships that have a name have this little design at the back, a sort of lantern at the stern. On top of the cabin, there is a structure pointing upwards. That's a lantern. All these galleys were called lanternas because they were bigger than the normal galley, and they had lanterns that they were used for signaling or recognition. And the people, the commanders would usually have this kind of galley. Next slide, please. We see the same thing here on the other side. This is the enemy, so to speak, side of the Turkish side. Next slide. Now, the Knights of Malta were participating in this battle with three ships. They were at the bottom, as was of the central wing that was run by Don John of Austria. Next slide, please. And they met their nemesis, so to speak. Bulucali, who had already been to Malta for the Great Siege, had captured 3 of their galleys in the Saint Clement incident. And at one point at Lepanto had actually captured the Santa Maria, the flagship, which was the only one that had escaped when Saint Clement lost his ships. But it was recaptured. All the knights and soldiers on board, most of them died. He was the only senior Turkish commander to escape Lepanto, and he went on to have an illustrious career. So that's enough. That's all. Thank you very much. This tells us basically, Camoccio telling us that Occhiali or Lucali fled with 30 galleys. So thank you very much for listening. My apologies for being a bit maybe on the long side, but I think I had a bit too much to say. But thanks for listening.
Well, you know, it's hard to be a chairperson. I don't want to do it.
Yes. It is very hard.
But we very much appreciate all the information and the hard work put into into the presentation. Extremely interesting. Thank you very, very much, Mario.
Thank you.
I have a few questions for you. All right, let's go to the final presentation. This is by our president of the Malta Map Society, and that is Joseph Skiro. He's a paper conservator by profession. As I said, he's the president of the Malta Map Society and editor of the Malta Map Society Journal. He's written several articles on conservation and on cartography, obviously, with particular reference to Malta. His is an interesting title, Love, Sex and Mapping. He'll be talking about two rare and very elusive maps by Gianmaria Furlanetto, published in Venice. These maps were commissioned by Andrea Memmo, whose coat of arms appears on the maps. Memmo had, and this is where it gets interesting, had a steamy and secret love affair with the Anglo-Venetian beauty Justiniana Wynne, notwithstanding the tight vigilance of her mother, who wanted her daughter to marry into a richer family. In the end, she ended up pregnant, and she turned to Andrea's friend, the ribald sexual adventurer Giacomo Casanova, who promised to help her, but ended up raping her. So 10 hot minutes, over to you, Joe.
Wait a minute, sorry. Let me share screen, eh? Is that,
Yes, please.
yeah? Is it okay?
Yes. Could you just end?
Okay.
That's it. Well done. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll be talking about two maps, as Bernadette was saying. They were published by Gianmaria Furlanetto. And as she said, they are very rare and very elusive. We know about these maps from the Smith Map Catalogue of 1781. Actually, it mentions not two, but three maps by Giacomo Maria Furlanetto. They are the Distinto Piano Geografico delle Isole di Malta, Gozo e Comino, which is a map of the islands of Malta, Piano Iconografico della Città Capitale di Malta, which is about the map of Valletta, and then there's a third one, Geografica Tavola dei Mari, Isole e Regni, in mezzo al quali le isole di Malta, Gozo e Comino, and there is Sivende da Gianmaria Furlanetto. This third map of the Mediterranean has never yet surfaced, and it seems it is not to be found in any map collection in any libraries. Sorry. Incidentally, in the French edition of Boisgelin of 1809, there is a heading under the Catalogue des Ouvrages, one of the maps, which is the Piano Iconografico della Città Capitale di Malta. And these, as I said, have a story in themselves, because Dr. Ganado had gone to Prague because he knew there were a pair in Prague about 60 years ago, but he couldn't, when he talked to the archivist at the Prague archives, they couldn't understand each other. He never saw them. 4 years ago, and Mario Brincat has just mentioned it, I went with Bernardine to Prague at the invitation of the Minister of Culture, when we had this presentation of the World Memory Register of the Camacho maps, which you mentioned. I took the opportunity to try and look at them, but unfortunately they could not find them, and they told us that there are about 5,000 maps still to be catalogued. Fortunately, they came out in an auction about 6 months later, and I bought them. And this is one of them, and as you can see, it has no imprint here. and they were published roughly in about 1780. The other one is the map of Valletta, and underneath here there is si vende da Gian Maria Fullanetto sul Ponte de Baratteri. And as you can see from the first one and the second one, they are both maps based on De Palmeo's maps. Now, there is a copy of the Valletta map which belonged to Dr. Ganado, and it is found in the Ganado Malta map collection now at Musa, which is interesting because this copy has side notes in ink, which obviously add even more information on the fortification system of Valletta and the three cities. And that is already interesting in itself. But I got very excited, and I was really pleased and flabbergasted at the same time that when I put them next to each other, I noticed that they are not the same map. They are two states. The one which have just shown you has no coat of arms here, whilst this one has the coat of arms. So there are two states. So we are lucky that now Dr. Ganado has the first state and I have the second state. Now, that is the part which I'm talking about, the mapping of the. But now I come to the sexy part, if you want to call it that way. I discovered just by chance that the coat of arms belonged to this Andrea Memmo. How did I find this coat of arms? Because it's very difficult to find coat of arms and who they belong to. But I was doing some research on Vincenzo Maria Coronelli, and this Coronelli had published a book about the Arme Blasoni, or the coat of arms of the Venetian families. And among them, there was this coat of arms of the Memmo family. As you can see, the feed is divided in two sections, with the upper section being gold and the lower section blue. And inside the sections, there are three lime fruits in the opposing colors, actually. On your left, there is the portrait of Andrea Memmo by Angelica Kaufmann. Now, he was very much in love, as Bernardine said, with Justiniana Wynne. And we know more about this love affair because in the 1990s, stacks of memos, sometimes team letters to a certain Justiniana Wynne, were found in an attic of Palazzo Mocenigo on the Grand Canal by a Mocenigo descendant Alvise de Robilan. Upon the untimely death of Alvise, his son Andrea de Robilant researched the letters and eventually wrote the historical work A Venetian Affair, published in 1963. There were already letters from Justiniana to Andrea Memmo, but now with these new letters of Andrea Memmo to Justiniana, we have the whole picture begins to emerge. In fact, the book is a very good read, but I'm afraid I cannot quote you any excerpts from it unless you activate the parental control button here. Who was Justiniana Wynne? Justiniana Wynne, as I said, was an Anglo-Venetian lady. She later married Count Rosenberg Orsini, and she was an author. But yet she is best known for her secret love affair with Andrea Memmo, one of the last statesmen of the Venetian Republic. Andrea Memmo was so besotted by Justiniana that he continuously sent her letters, oftentimes bawdy and steamy. and tried every means and ruse to get close to her, notwithstanding the vigilance of her ambitious mother, who wanted her daughter to marry a richer family. Though even from Memmo's side, the family didn't want him to marry this Justiniana anyway. In the end, she ended up pregnant, although she doesn't actually say by whom. And she eventually turned to Andrea's friend, the rebel as sexual adventurer Giacomo Casanova, who promised her that he knew of a certain cream that could end her pregnancy. He told her, however, that the cream needed to go deep inside her, and he knew of only one method to make sure that the cream really penetrated her body. Of course, she still delivered her child even after Casanova had raped her. Now, going back to the Furlanetto maps, the question which comes to mind is, why were the maps commissioned by Memmo? In my studies, I found no apparent connections of Andrea Memmo with the Order of St. John, although some of his ancestors were Knights of Malta, actually. Could it be that he was trying to become a Knight of Malta, but that his friendship with Casanova compromised his chances? That is something which I still haven't yet found out. Another problem that I have with these maps is, why are these maps so rare that only these exemplars which I have shown today seem to have survived? If we go back to these two states.
Joe, although the night is young, I have to ask you to.
Yes, I'm concluding. As you can
you.
see, the first state is quite sharp. The second state with the coat of arms, it looks rather worn. So quite a lot of copies were made. What happened to these maps? And with this question mark, I conclude my talk here. Thank you very much.
And on that sizzling note, I'd like to thank Joseph for your very unusual and most interesting presentation. Now we have some time for any comments, any questions. Let me just have a look at the chat. Yes, we have a question from Dr. Joe Nabela, and it's directed to Mario Brincat.
Yes.
Do we know of a map of the Battle of Lepanto and Patras, which took place in 1603, which was a great success for the Knights of St. John?
Yeah. To be honest, I'm not aware of any, but I find it difficult to believe that there is none. I'm sure, I'm sure that somewhere in a auberge or a palace somewhere, there must be a painting commemorating the sure. Are you hearing me?
Yes, yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. Because for a moment I thought I wasn't. No, so I'm sure one must exist, because these battles generated lots of paintings and artifacts, including ex-votos and stuff. So I find it difficult to believe that that an important victory went unrecorded, with uncelebrated by means of any work of art. But I'm not aware of any, to be honest. That would be an interesting search to make, I think. An interesting topic for research. Yes. But thanks for raising it. Maybe Joe knows of something.
I believe that, but offhand I don't know the exact name of the book. But I believe that in the book about the Battle of Lepanto, the 1571 Battle of Lepanto, not the 1603, the notary Paul Pisani actually has an image of a cartouche, and in it there is basically the mention of this battle, but I haven't seen an actual map.
Uh-huh.
It's
Okay.
just
I'll look it
cartoon,
up because I don't recall seeing it, but you know, I didn't check it recently, but it's an interesting lead. I'll look it up. Thanks.
Yes, he told me that it's in a private collection. So I went to look for it at the National Library, and they don't have it. And he told me that it's in a private collection. But
Okay.
I mean, I just saw the cartouche and the
Okay.
image inside the cartouche. But it would be interesting because it was a very successful battle. Obviously, after 1571, the Ottomans fortified Lepanto and Patras, and therefore everybody thought that they were impregnable now. So this victory for the knights, it was more of a search for grain, because there was a lot of shortage in the Mediterranean, and they went for the grain stores. But they managed to get to the castles and even penetrate and get inside, and there are even the keys of the both of the castles of Lepanto and Patra still hung by the side of the chapel of Philermos at St. John.
Okay.
So it was a very important battle.
Yes.
There is no.
In fact, I find it. It would be very strange if one of the knights on board did not commission a painting or something. I mean.
Yes, I would appreciate if anybody came across something, because I'm looking into a document we found at the Notarial Archives and mentions this battle, and I would appreciate if anybody finds anything about it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Joan.
Welcome.
We'll definitely be on the lookout. You never know. Everybody needs to be on the lookout.
Can I have a question?
Yes, of course you can.
To Ivan, please. Ivan, are you hearing me?
Ivan. Thank you.
Hello, Ivan.
Thank you, William.
With regard to the Hallwell drawings, I mean maps in this case, but they have been drawn on, okay? They have been scribbled on. The red marks which you showed us, if I remember correctly, do they indicate any firing positions? Were they military, naval? What were the significance of these marks, especially in the Valletta map?
Yes. I mean, there are marks all over the maps, and they obviously are worthy of serious study by a military historian. But it is obvious that they are the positions where you would expect cannons to be placed. Unfortunately, my knowledge of military history is quite limited, and I always say one of the things I would like to do when I retire eventually is to spend time maybe researching more some of this material. But I thought I'll put them out there for whoever might be interested in seeing them as they are, and maybe go in a bit more detail.
If you notice, Ivan, they seem to be targeting the entrances of the harbors, either Marsamxett side or the Grand Harbor side. Do you agree?
I would agree with you, but I have no confirmation. My intention is to also maybe compare them with military records of the time. It's a very specific time. We're speaking of a 4-year period, 1856 to 1816. And what I found most interesting, and this maybe is of particular interest to you, William, I mean, you wrote an excellent book. I had to stop my presentation because it ended actually with a photo of your book. But since I mentioned it in the beginning, I thought I'll leave it out at the end. But it is a book I recommend to all members of the society. And in it, and this is something which maybe we can discuss sometime in the future, you make a lot of emphasis on the role Captain Smith had and his plans. And in fact, 2 of the 5 maps are from Captain Smith's time. But when it comes to the actual plan or map of all Malta and Gozo, which Smith had prepared a very good one, and it's illustrated in your book, in the 1850s, it seems that the most used or relevant map of Malta was another old map by Worsley from 1824,
Yes,
which
yes.
was printed in 1856. And what if I had a bit more time, I would have explained is that the combination of these 5 maps, you have here probably the most senior, one of the most senior active military officers on the ground. And you know which 5 maps, obviously he would have had access to all the maps available at the time. He chose those 5 maps to carry around with him. And that is something that, you know, is maybe worthy of further study by people like you.
If I remember correctly as well, Ivan, the Worsley map is in, you'll find that in Rabat, no? The 1824 map, no?
Well, I mean, it's not, I mean, I tried to look for it. For some reason, it's not mentioned in your book, which is curious.
No. And it's not a, sorry, it's not a chart. I mean,
I know,
the 1824 map is sort of a military one. It's a topographical map of Malta. It's not naval.
But the way it was used, there are, you know, the soundings and it was used in the same way a map of Malta and Gozo would be used. I agree with you. The other 3 maps are nautical maps proper. You know, the harbor, the Valletta Harbor, St. Paul's Bay, and Valletta to
And Marsa Scirocco as well.
Malta and Gozo, obviously.
Can I add something, please? Can I add something?
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
So Halliwell was actually the adjutant general. So he was in charge of supplies, etc. So the markings on the bastions could refer to an inventory of cannons, for example, or just an enumeration of cannons. And from experience, when Sir Manly Power, who's lieutenant governor in the late 1818s, early 1820s, the Hereford Records Office has his inventory of the cannons, actually. If I can share the screen, I will, here we are. I can show you a picture of Halliwell. Can you?
Yes.
Can you see him? There we are. I think it's rather amusing. He's on the far left there, okay, with his moustache, etc. This was taken in 1869. I think what's amusing is that even though they're out sketching, he's wearing his top hat there. Okay. So
interesting.
Thank you very much.
You said 1869, Chris?
Yes, this photo is dated 1869 and is taken.
He died later that year, so.
Yes.
And he died aged only 47. Obviously, he looks quite old in that photo.
Well, he suffered for many years from some unknown disease. And also, incidentally, I hope, well, he was actually the governor's son-in-law. He married the governor's daughter, Governor Reed's daughter, because he had a previous posting with Governor Reed in Bermuda. So he had a long attachment to the governor's family.
Thank you, Chris, for that. It's always lovely to look at old photographs.
If I may, Bernadine, I would just like to say that at the notarial archives, we found very few, 1 or 2 maps, 19th century maps. So anybody who wishes to study them can contact us. And
are they printed or manuscript maps? John?
Manuscript, one of them.
Manuscript.
One of them, I think, is manuscript, and it's on parchment, actually. In fact, I have to come and see it, because that is if it is parchment. But I think it is on parchment, so it is very, very interesting.
Yeah, and there's another one on rather flimsy paper. It's, you know, like tracing paper, but it seems to be a military map.
What dates are they?
I don't know the exact date, but they seem to be 19th century. They're British period for sure, but I don't know the exact date.
In English, they are in English, you mean, as well?
I don't know.
Go and see
I have
them.
to look at them again. I am just bringing them to your attention so that anybody who would like to study them,
Thank you.
you know, we could perhaps forward the image.
Yes,
I
please.
mean, I know for one for sure, but you know, one may be of interest to anybody who's studying the period as well.
Mhm. Can you send them over to Joe, perhaps, or no?
Of course.
And then Joe can share them with us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Incidentally, going back to Worsley's maps, Worsley's maps were printed up to 1896, Ivar. And they were actually two maps, a map of Gozo and a map of Malta, and then they were meant to be glued together. So you cut the edge of the Gozo map and you superimpose it on the other one. But actually, they are two separately printed maps.
That I might, I might disagree on when they were actually, on which edition they are, because
You cannot say, because the edge is yours.
But I was going to mention this. The two maps I showed in my presentation, one is the one in my collection, and the other one was an image provided, and I thank him for it, to Claude Micallef-Attard. And the lines where they actually cut to fold the maps are totally different. So my thought was, it might be that in some editions they were printed on one sheet, and in other editions they were printed on two separate sheets, possibly. I mean, it's a huge map. I mean,
it's a huge map to do it on one.
Pardon?
It's a huge map to do it on one, you know.
Exactly, that's what I thought. But how does it explain that then they're cut at different places?
It depends who cuts them and who glues them. Incidentally, as I told you, I've just bought the Worsley maps only last week, and they are actually in two frames because they are two maps together, you know. So they were left
since
them.
you're mentioning this, maybe I mean with Bernardine's permission, I could show you a detail from where they where they meet from again.
Incidentally, where they bought in Malta, also or from abroad?
No, when I was living in the US 30 years ago.
Morelli.
I don't know how they ended up in New Hampshire, but.
But am I right in saying, sorry, am I right in saying that there is a full map not cut that is at the Rabat Archives, the 1824 map?
I mean, they say that there is a 6-inch to the mile map of Worsley, which everybody is still looking for, but they haven't found it. And it is roughly the same size as that map, which you see at the archives in Rabat on the wall in the corridor.
That's the one.
Probably that is based on.
So if I can show you just this, because it's an interesting detail since you mentioned it, Joe. So this is the image that was sent to me by Claude, and this is my two maps next to each other. Now, where Malta and Gozo and Comino on the separate maps, Halliwell decided to cut them at a certain point. Yeah. It was very, very precise. So on the Malta, so this is a detail of where they touch, sort of. So on the left-hand side, you have the edge of the map of Malta. And on the right-hand side, you have the map of Gozo and Comino. But Ras Chirkewa is cut. So he, on the Malta map, covers, or rather, by manuscript, I mean by hand, he adds the part that he cut off from Ras Chirkewa on the Gozo map. and says this point appears in the map of Gozo. I don't know if you can see the detail.
Yes, but that's
Very clear, yes.
So
probably
basically,
did that himself to remind himself that that point can be seen on the Gozo map, you know?
Yes, yes.
no, but what I'm saying is whether they were two separate maps cut at that point, one wouldn't know. But it could be that that is the point where they were originally printed on separate sheets. But on the other hand, the actual title, so this is the map which has not had the part of the title cut out. You can see the title is for both sheets together.
Yes, yes.
And what Hallowell did was he removed them and he added his own here. On this, you can see them
In manuscript.
Manuscript on the left-hand side of the screen. I mean, once you start talking about these maps, it's I mean, there's no limit to detail you can go into, but it might be interesting to compare them with your maps.
Yes, yeah.
And you know, sometimes when you see maps next to each other, and when was yours printed? Do you know?
1856.
I thought the same.
Yes.
Okay.
But there is a copy in the BNF, which is dated 1896. So
it was printed in 1896, Joe.
Yes, and they continued printing it for quite some time. Yes.
That's fascinating, because William made a study of, you know, how they continue being changed, etc.
Yeah.
And if you see from 1896 to 1856, that's another 40 years.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised that it would have been updated as well. So they used.
But actually, it's from 1824 to 1896, so there was quite a span.
This is what I mean.
Go around and see, for example, which fortifications are showing. And we know when certain fortifications were built by the British. You would say, oh, this was added later because it did not exist in 1824.
But there again, you have to be very, very careful and look at them 10,000 times. Because with the full Lanetto map of Valletta, I noticed it only when I was preparing my PowerPoint presentation. I had seen Ganado's version of the full Lanetto map of Valletta 1,000 times, and I never thought it would be different from mine until I, you know. So sometimes to find differences, it takes time.
Yes, yeah, agreed.
Will, I don't know if it's out of print, but this is a book I recommend to everyone. So it's a really good book. This is the last slide I didn't show in my presentation when I ran out of time. But out of courtesy to, I think I should show it. It's a very good book.
Thank you.
It's amazing how the field of cartography can, you know, open up to other fields and create other rooms of discussion. However, at this point, we need to wrap up. On behalf of the Malta Map Society, I would like to thank all 5 speakers who made their very interesting contributions this evening. I'm happy to inform you that tonight's show and tell has been recorded. Very good. Everybody was on his and her best behavior. This recording will be put up on YouTube. On YouTube. Yes. I would like to thank everyone who has attended. We encourage you to check out the Malta Map Society website as well as our Facebook page. And last but definitely not least, I would like us all to thank Dr. Albert Ganado, because he was the one who has instilled so much love, fascination, and passion, you know, in the field of Maltese cartography. And I think we should remain eternally indebted to him, because he brought such an interesting subject that can, you know, interest any academic, any scholar, anyone who's in love with Malta under the sun. So I'd like to conclude, you know, thank you, Dr. Ranado, because were it not for your passion, you know, we wouldn't be here today doing this first edition of Show and Tell, and we look forward to doing many more. So thank you, everybody. Have a nice evening, enjoy your dinners, and contemplate on all the territory, land, seas, soundings, drum lines that we've learned from this evening's Show and Tell. Good night. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal, as well.
Yes, thank you, Crystal.